Hello, my name is Elizabeth Spaeth, and I am interviewing Judith Ramos, an assistant professor and PhD student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in their Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development Department. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you today.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so I just want to start off by asking how long that you've lived in Alaska.
Most of my life, except for maybe like 10 or 11 years where I lived in Canada, from maybe the 90s, during the 90s, I lived in Canada.
All right. And since you've been living there, what environmental changes have you witnessed occur in the area? I know we hear a lot about like melting glaciers, but what exactly have you seen?
Well, in my area, I live in southeast Alaska, and we've gotten a lot more mudslides or landslides. A bay up where I live, up by the glacier. There's an area that we camp out and on the corner of the glacier, and that a couple years ago was a big mudslide. And Sitka, where they were building some houses, that was another area where there was a mudslide, and I think, I can't remember for sure, but I think there were people in there. So those are just some of the changes. There's been a lot of increasing heavier rain. The rain has gotten a lot more intense. In other parts of Alaska, up north, the northern people have experienced increasing erosion along the course, melting of permafrost. The interior has gotten a lot more fire. There's been a couple of summers with really intense fire, storms, well, not storms, but a lot more fires than we've seen in the hotter temperatures. Those are some of the areas, and also I think the warming temperatures in the water. There is some effects to the shellfish losing their shell. And I think there's been some changes with the salmon. We've gotten the salmon. Some of the salmon are either coming back late or early, and then some of the salmon are not really coming back, like our king salmon haven't been coming back. And I think there's been a change with the fish up in the colder. They're heading towards the colder waters. So some parts of Alaska with the colder waters have gotten a lot more of the salmon than they got in the past. And there's been changes with the plants, with our salmon berries. There's been changes with our berries. There are changes in the timing of when they do come, and if they even do come. So those are just some of the changes that's been happening in Alaska.
And so I assume that these changes are having a lot of direct effects on the residents of Alaska, in particular in your area.
Yeah, there are areas that haven't gotten the same cold temperatures. Their rivers are traditionally in the winter was a place where they could use the rivers like roads, so that now the rivers are not freezing up. So they've lost that way of transportation on the rivers. Some winters, there's been not enough snow for us to run our sled dog racing. There's been some cancellations of some of our sled dog races because there's no snow on the ground. And the trail, like I did a trail, there were some parts of the trail that they didn't have any snow at all. For some of the people that have to hunt along the rivers, there's been increasing dangers for the hunters crossing the rivers, and it's made them dangerous for hunting. There's been some the people have had to go further away than they usually do to get food. So it's expensive and harder to get some foods. They have to go further away because where they get the food is changed. So those are some of the changes. There's melting permafrost in the north has caused the cellar that people use the ground as like to keep their food frozen, and with the cellars melting, it's caused they can't put the food in there, and there's increasing changes with bacteria and other things, so it's made it dangerous for them to use the traditional winter ground where they would freeze things in those areas. So those are just a couple of the changes that's impacted people directly for their food gathering and subsistence uses.
And so did these environmental changes affect like what field you wanted to get your PhD in, or kind of what you wanted to study or ultimately go into?
Well, there's a couple areas. One of the areas that I research is the erosion of our archaeological sites along the coast. So I've been looking at monitoring those erosion with other groups that are looking at around the state where some sites have started eroding, and there's been no protection for some of the archaeological sites. So that's one area. I've been studying the seals, the harbor seals. So we're keeping an eye on to see if there's been any climate changes with our seals. There was one summer where they were getting these weird patches on them, and we didn't know what it was. And later on, we found out that the seals were getting a sunburn on their skin, and that's caused the unusual patches. With the increasing melting of ice, that's the traditional places where the seals would gather and have their young on the ice. That was a form of protection against the killer whales, but with the ice melting, there will be less ice for the seals to have their pups on, so that was a concern with less ice for the seals. So that was something that we were trying to monitor and keep an eye on in that area.
And if you could just briefly remind me where exactly in Alaska you're seeing these changes, or where exactly you've primarily lived throughout the course of your life?
I primarily lived in southeast Alaska, and my community is called Yakutat, and it's at the northern panhandle, or the North Gulf Coast part of Alaska. So it's along the coast, but we have a huge bay, which it's like a big glacier that used to be all the way out, and the glacier melted about 24 miles back and became this big bay there. So we hunt up at the northern part of the bay where there's a big glacier that's constantly moving all the time, and that's where we hunt seals. And then along the coast is where we have fishing camps along the coast on these the mouth of different river systems. So this is our traditional way of living, is hunting and the seals and fishing along the coast. Some of the fishermen fish right in the Pacific Ocean itself. A majority of our fishermen fish just inside the rivers where the salmon enter the streams. And so a lot of the coast is eroding, so there's increased erosion of the shoreline along the coast.
Wow, that's amazing that even in like one of the coldest parts of Alaska, you're still seeing such drastic changes in the environment.
Yeah, it is increasing warming temperature, and the waters are have reached these temperatures we've not seen before in the rivers. Gotten really hot. So that's one of the other things is in Southeast we usually get the cedar tree, and they're protected in the winter with snow. But with no snow anymore, there's been the cedar trees have been dying off. So they're looking at ways to plant the cedar further north where there is snow that can have some protection of the cedar trees. That was another thing the Forest Service was experimenting on in Southeast.
Well, Judy, I can't tell you how helpful this has been. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I know you must be really busy, so I really appreciate it.
Okay. So this is for ecology class?
Yes, it is. So, you've been extremely helpful to me, so I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, it's nice talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good MLK Day.
All right, bye.
Okay, bye.